Why do you want it? This is a Commonplace book, Commonplace binder. I'm going to put this down. So, How to Get a Second Edition Commonplace binder. That is, I believe, the longest title I've ever had for a video on this channel. This is the Commonplace Binder 101 playlist, video number 77 of 100. We're going to go through these one column at a time, and then we're going to get to that, which is the next video. So, why do you want it? Why do you want this thing? Well, first let's go over what the heck this is. So this is my Commonplace book, Commonplace binder, because it's a binder. These are the 100 video idea keywords for the 100 video playlist. And those help me figure out what I'm going to make. So, inside, we have rings, because it's a binder. And because it's a binder, it's a little bit different than a normal Commonplace book. And the reason for that is there are no page numbers because everything moves around, because I can put stuff in, take stuff out, move it all around. And so if there are no page numbers, it doesn't make sense to have an index track everything, which is why we have a contents page. So I'm going to set this down because it will get heavy as I'm planning on recording 4 videos. So why do you want this thing? We still haven't really gone into that. If you're going for a second edition, you're not really going for like your own thing. And so maybe what you want to do is you just want to take this from another student or a relative or somebody who works in your field, and that way you will already have like a narrowed search on what you're actually looking for. But then again, this is basically like looking through another channel's likes. And that can be very helpful. There are some platforms which are almost entirely based on that, or off of that. Like, for example, on Tumblr, which, you know, I now have a Tumblr account. You can check that in a link somewhere. It's on the channel somewhere. I might start putting it in the description. I don't think I will, because I want to keep the descriptions as ad-free as possible. And while, you know, there is no ad, this is not a sponsored video, it does feel weird adding all the links down below. But what I was going to say about the Tumblr is, if you go onto someone's Tumblr, you can kind of get a general idea of what they were looking at, what they were thinking about, and what other people they know were looking at and thinking about. Because chances are the person probably reblogs some things every so often. So it might be kind of nice to look through what a grandparent was looking at, maybe when they were your age, but at the same time, it's a little weird to have a second edition Commonplace book. Worth inheriting. So if there are some secrets in there, maybe, you know, Grandma wrote down her favorite recipes, including the ones that she used to cook for you when you were like 5 and you'd never seen or heard that recipe spoken of by any adults. But it's real, and you remember it, and you try it again, and it works. You finally got that food back from childhood. So, like, maybe in that sense it's worth inheriting. But if you're looking for, like, a lot of other tips, they might be just outdated. And it might be even in the recipe that it only works with like a specific cooking ingredient that happens to be in Grandma's house. And if you already inherited one of the things, that means the house might be kind of empty. So you might have to go track down that specific item. Glorification. Maybe, you know, Grandma was from the greatest generation, and we have to, you know, worship everything about them. Or maybe that's why this is from like a colleague or something. Maybe they are the best at what they do, and you want to emulate a little bit of that. At the same time, though, it's a little weird to just go through somebody's stuff after they died. I mean, I know if people collect a lot of stuff over the course of their lifetime, that's just what's going to happen because they're stuff. But it can be a little weird to like glorify the notebook of some random person. Strong parent. So maybe, like I was saying earlier, you know, we're focused on inheriting this because we never actually got to like interact with the people who existed a long time ago. Maybe the grandparents weren't so nice to the parents, and so the parents don't really want to introduce their kids to the grandparents because, well, the grandparents are kind of terrible. And so the parents might be super strong and individualistic, or they might just have a bad relationship with the grandparents. So because this won't necessarily transfer from parent to child and then, you know, just keep going down for hundreds of generations, I think it's a much better idea to put this in schools as a thing that gets transferred from older student to younger student. So, you know, the older student will do well in school, and if they don't, we won't pass on their book, because why are you going to pass on the books of the people who failed? While it might be more democratic in that sense, if you just grab the top 50 performers out of 100, you know, like, at least maybe the book will be helpful for the next person, because if someone's in the top half, they probably actually used it. So, yeah. I don't think it's really worth focusing on the parent or the grandparent or whatever. It's just probably better to put it inside of a system that will exist outside of the family structure and can't really be taken away, because if we get to the point where everyone has one, any sort of attempt at regulation or, you know, limiting people's access to the knowledge that they curated with the help of their community, I feel like there might be a lot of backlash to that. Maybe not on the same level of gun ownership, or maybe not on the same level as gun ownership, but like, it might be pretty strong, because it is like a personal library, which is a memory of all the people who came before you. So, I'm just saying, leading the way. Maybe you don't have the strong parent. Maybe the grandparent doesn't exist. So, like, if the parents or grandparents are bad, or if they have no money, or if they're dead, they can't really pass the thing on, and they can't really, you know, lead their descendant. Which is why I think it'd be a lot better to put this in sort of an education system, because then the education system can pass it on. And all we would really have to do is just make sure that people inherited the book that their relatives had. So, you know, I don't think that one's too difficult. Shame in switching. It might be you're focusing on a commonplace, but it's not a binary. And so maybe you might be like, I don't know if I can switch from this one method to this other method, even though they're basically the same. But you're going to have the same problem if you're focusing on a second edition book, because someone is going to have another version of the book. And just to like briefly answer this question, in case anyone's like, it's been over 7 minutes, what's the answer? You're only going to get the second edition if someone made a first edition, okay? So, unless you are making a first edition and then you are making a second edition based on that, you're going to have to get it from someone else. And so if you're doing that, and the people don't exist, then they can't make the thing. And if they can't make the thing, they're not going to pass it on. So how do you get the second version? Somebody made a first version. And it's probably easier to get it if you're related to the person, because it's just kind of weird to walk up to a random person and be like, hey, do you have a copy of your diary that you can just give to random people? Like, it's weird. Following old orders. Now, this is one of the problems. If you have a second edition binder, there might be some instructions in there that you follow, not necessarily realizing what they're for. And sometimes following old orders can be really good. Maybe we did actually get this from grandma, or, you know, great grandma, or, you know, great grandpa, or whatever. And there might be some things that worked back in their day that stopped working because of some larger geopolitical event that are somehow working now. Now, if we're, you know, doing this education system related thing that I'm talking about, there might be periods of history in which some things get basically purged, which is kind of a problem. But if these get loaded up with propaganda while they're also getting purged, eventually, if there's enough propaganda moving around, I am pretty sure that the kids will have one version of the propaganda, the parents will have another version, and then the grandparents will have yet a third version. So if the generations interact at all, it might be really obvious to everyone that, hey, somebody's lying, and we need to figure out who. But following old orders might be kind of good with the recipe, like I explained earlier. It's kind of nice to be able to, you know, pass down knowledge. Fated to be forgotten. All of this is going to be temporary. So it might last 10,000 years, but saying that something's going to last 100 times 100 years, that's a little crazy. Because even if we have this unbroken chain of, you know, parent to child, Eventually there might be a kid that just can't read, or they can't see, or there's something that prevents the full capacity of the knowledge being transferred. And so in that way, it might get broken up. And so if there's no centralized system, there's no one to pick up the slack. Now, if we focus everything on a school system and people don't hold on to their version of the book after the school, there's no real chance of any sort of reconstruction if, the school gets loaded with propaganda, or there is a large scale, huge threat to humanity, for example. Maybe there's a really big asteroid, or a solar storm, or a giant war, or, any of the many issues that preppers are constantly telling everyone that they need to worry about. A lot of this just will be forgotten. And this can sort of be a good thing in some ways, because if we're following all these old orders, we might end up like, a monkey climbing a ladder and then getting a shock as it reaches for a banana, and then I'm pretty sure there's an experiment about this where the monkeys were trying to climb the ladder because they knew there was a banana up there, but they weren't allowed to go after it. And then there were shocks, and eventually a few generations later, the monkeys were preventing each other from climbing the ladder specifically because they thought they were going to get shocked. But then after that, it was monkeys who just knew they weren't supposed to climb the ladder. And so we might end up following really weird orders that make absolutely no sense. By the way, I have no idea if that experiment is actually real or what the name of it was, but the point is, we might just do weird behaviors, not because they're the most efficient or because they're the nicest, or they might just be ineffective random things that happen to go along with all the stuff that we did normally. Okay. Source of divinity. Yeah, I don't know about this one, but if you consider a Bible or another holy text to be mostly a collection of quotes and little stories that get passed on throughout history, a Commonplace is maxed out when it comes for a source of divinity. If you're doing that, if you're collecting quotes from prophets, dude, that's about as close as you're gonna get, assuming someone being alone with a holy book is a source of divinity. And depending on who you talk to, people might disagree with that one, but not accessible. Would a source of divinity be allowed in schools? Probably not. Although maybe if it's in Oklahoma, you never know. But it might also be that the school is just there to lead the way, and then the strong parent is there to show the altered version, which shows the sources of divinity. So the school sets up the basic secular knowledge of, this is how to tie your shoelaces, this is how to properly cite things, or this is just what the periodic table looks like. And then the parent can introduce all of the divinity later on, because just because it's not allowed in the school doesn't mean the parent isn't allowed to have it. Even if someone's in school until they're 20 years old, assuming they're going to live until at least 60, you've got 2/3 of your life to fill that in. And it's not like anyone under the age of 10 is really going to be able to effectively use one of these. Because I don't know about you, but my writing when I was 10 years old was not super strong in terms of the handwriting or just the quality of the writing. Dystopian. Yeah. Is it a little dystopian if everyone carries around their knowledge? I feel like in some ways it actually is the opposite. If we don't get to carry around our knowledge, that will be a little problematic, because if all the bots have the knowledge or the infinite information and the humans aren't allowed to carry information, we're just we're not putting ourselves in a good spot there, because the robots will always have that information. A computer is not going to randomly forget a larger portion of information than a person. Now, of course, the computer monitor just turned off, which is really funny timing, because I was going to say, if the computer dies, then all this stuff is lost. And the same goes for a person, but people normally don't just keel over, at least as early into their life as a computer. Grand visions. Maybe you have this super long, I don't even know where to point here. a grand vision of the future in which everyone has their own Commonplace book and everyone learns it as a Commonplace binder because it can transition into a Commonplace book or Zettelkasten or digital notes or maybe an AI prompting book. But maybe you just end up with brain rot. Like, sometimes when people have grand visions, they don't necessarily think about how it could go wrong or how it could be misused by a person that they don't agree with. So I've seen this happen a lot with engineers. They'll make something and then they'll realize, oh, I just automated my job away from my boss. It could get really awkward. There's also, the brain rot problem. If everyone has their own book, are we just not going to think? Well, I think the book might actually prevent us from ending up in that situation, because if we have the book, yes, we might have slightly reduced cognitive capacity when it comes to memorization, but at the same time, we have a book to memorize with all of the most important information. So I think that'll be kind of neutral, but if having the book allows us to not entirely rely on AI and the internet and everything else, I think it's a pretty good argument that we can slow the brain rot by giving the toddlers the Commonplace book, Commonplace binder, as opposed to an iPad. Because we can still make something, which is, a pretty book with a lot of colors and drawings of whatever characters they find the most interesting. But we don't necessarily need to just put the kid in front of a screen all day, every day. Burden or benefit. So if we're lugging around this big book, how are we going to carry it? Well, maybe we put it on the iPad. That can, be kind of a problem, because then everybody will figure out how to mess around with the iPad. Also, just as a reminder, nothing is sponsored. I'm just saying iPad over and over again because the last time some random person came to my door and was just like, hello, I am doing stuff in the neighborhood. They wouldn't stop talking about iPads. So that is why I'm saying the word over and over and over again. Yeah, I think it should be a benefit. Maybe you think it's a burden. Let me know in the comments down below. Knowledge has been lost. So when we were talking about fated to be forgotten earlier, I kind of talked about this. Knowledge has been lost and knowledge will be lost. It might be that if we have a system where, say, there are 100 students that go to school, 50 of them pass on their books and the other 50 don't. The 50 that didn't pass on their books will have a little bit of extra knowledge, and that knowledge will be lost. But it might be somebody didn't pass on their book because they got last in the class, because their cat puked all over the book, or their dog ate it, or they were throwing rocks off the bridge on their way to school, and then instead of throwing the rock, they threw their book. There are a bunch of different reasons why the person all the way at the bottom might not actually have their book. Maybe their parents got divorced and they were moving in between houses, and then they left it at one and they forgot where it was. Knowledge has been lost. Knowledge will be lost. But if the top half of the students are always passing on the information, I believe the knowledge loss will be minimal, and we'll be able to build these larger and larger knowledge silos, where it's basically plus 1 page per year. Not so much in the first year, but after 100 years, that's 100 pages. Unfair advantage. So if someone's cheating in school, normally the way they do this, as far as I know, is they have additional information. So if we give everyone additional information, and instead of people simply just having to regurgitate information, it's more about building knowledge and wisdom and quoting things from their pre-existing knowledge base. If they have a Commonplace binder with them, or a Commonplace book, it doesn't really matter. It could be a personal knowledge base. The point is, if someone is quoting directly from information in front of them, rather than using a bot, they might be on equal footing. Now, it's also possible that they're just not going to be on equal footing at all. It might be that having digital everything is just more efficient and it's cheaper, and we don't need to teach anybody any skills other than how to use the tech. I don't know. But I do believe this is worth trying out, because worst case scenario, we can basically have a book of prompts, and then, assuming someone loses access to their account, or they want to use a different type of bot, they can just bring their book with them. You know, like, that's... It's fine. Deep cultural cost. If we don't add this, there is a chance we just won't have books in school anymore. Like, we're just going to quote little, like, one-liners, and then we're going to look at YouTube videos, and then, like... I don't know. It might get really weird, and I don't really know what it's going to look like. I don't think a lot of people know what it's going to look like either. What I do know is a lot of people are freaking out about the future of education. Confront the secrets. So, as I was talking about all the way over here, if you have the parent who's, like, altering the book afterwards, and then is trying to get the kid to alter their book as well, because there's clearly some propaganda, as the answers are totally different between the two time frames, and the same goes for the parent and the grandparent. So people want to know. People want to know what's going on. So I think this actually helps in democracy quite a bit, because if the book doesn't change, and assuming that people aren't going to spend a huge amount of time updating the information that they had in high school, it'll be pretty easy to see where history has changed. Alumni Donor. Uh-oh. Maybe we're creating these books because we realized that the way to get funds for the school is not actually to help out the students or the parents. It's to have a few people go through the program, tell them that they succeeded because of the program, and then get their donation money afterwards. I don't know. I think I heard about something like this when there was somebody on Brian Alexander's channel looking into where colleges get their money from. Might have been somewhere else. I don't know. But out of everything here, I think that one is the most directly taken or inspired from another source. Formerly Attainable. So it might be that the Alumni Donor money was attainable beforehand, but now we have to try a little bit harder. And if we have to try a little bit harder, why not set up a Commonplace binder? Because this way, the alumni will be super hyped to go back to their school, or at least consider helping out the people who are still there. Because if the students are passing on their books, and they are the students in the top half of the class, those are the students who are the most likely to go to college, or have some other high-level thing awaiting them afterwards. Or at least that's what the teachers want us to think. No, but probably the higher-ranking students are going to be able to get the higher-level opportunities, at least immediately out of school. And so if the alumni are no longer at the school, but their name is at the school because their books are still there, and students are using their books and they want to meet the alumni, I don't know. If I were an alum, I would feel pretty happy that someone's still working on the thing I was working on, and they want to know how I constructed everything. But that might just be a me thing. It feels a little weird not really mentioning Formerly Attainable, although I think I did that a little bit earlier, so... Store Your Memories is up next, and if you feel like that was formerly attainable, and you can't really store your memories anymore, because there's too much brain rot, then check out the next video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Okay, bye.